Okay, I'm going to try this in one take. The reason being is I want to show you how effective storytelling can be, and if I rehearse this and practice it, then I'm just going to be cheating effectively because I'm setting myself a challenge here. Alright, so I have coming up very soon, in fact starting this month, step by step, my online micro modules, which will be the journey into storytelling and story practice. All right, so I have a lot of people who say to me, Johnny, it's all right for you. You are from an acting background, you're natural in your performing ability. So, what hope have I got? Whenever I tell a story, I can never remember what's coming next. I can't even tell a good joke. That's what they say to me, okay? And a lot of people think that you have to have a good memory to tell a good story. But actually the way memory works is if you have a good story, then it will give you a good memory. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how this can really work. I have this one here, so I'm going to take this down. I have 20 words written down here, which are all different, disparate areas in which I have experienced storytelling. And I have just written them down, one on each page. And as I was doing that, I was making a link in my head from one to the other. And I'm going to see now if I can work my way through them and remember which one is coming next by the link that I put in my head. This is to show you how having a very simple story, yet a good story, can help to create a good memory. All right, here we go. So the first one is coaching. I just stand here so you can see it, right? Okay, right, so here we go. When I started out in storytelling, I had friends who were involved in coaching who asked me to join with them because they were working with corporates and particularly corporate executives who needed to use storytelling to be able to communicate effectively with all the hundreds and thousands of people who worked in their companies. And of course, these stories had to trickle down to team leaders. Team leaders needed to be able to provide stories for their teams, either in the nature of ensuring that the vision and goals and culture of the company were maintained, but also in understanding perhaps some of the new procedures or some of the older procedures, especially if they were doing an orientation. Now, if you don't have a good story or you don't have a story at all, then there could be quite a lot of misunderstanding. And I remember working with some designers who were struggling in the team because they were unable to communicate their designs effectively to other members of the team, such as the sales staff. Now, the sales staff needed to hear about these designs in a way that was going to make sense to them as they were trying to tell the story themselves to their customers. The customers may have been parents. I've done a lot of work with parents who asked me to help them with their storytelling because they recognize that telling a good story to their kids is a way of nurturing the relationship, a way of nurturing values as well. So of course, as parents are telling stories, so children are hearing stories. And as children hear stories, well, they love to write those stories down. You know, in school, children struggling with mainstream education perhaps need a lot of help in understanding that the stories they have are great and we can focus on those and enable them to tell good stories. And then in telling good stories, they build the confidence to be able to try and write good stories. Of course, children are hearing stories from maybe the religious communities that they might be part of. And I've worked with all sorts of people working for churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, who recognize that they have stories to tell, important stories for their community, and they need to be picking up the storytelling skills. But it's not just religious communities, religious workers. What about generally social workers? You know, kids understand their place in the world by the stories that surround them. The social workers need to understand those stories, need to be able to articulate those stories, need to be able to challenge those stories perhaps. Because of course social media is full of stories. And of course, I'm helping a lot of people at the moment to be able to understand how to retell their story for social media. Hey, that's what I'm doing here now. Okay, so when telling the story for social media, in some ways we can use filmmaking as an inspiration. And I've worked with a number of filmmakers on helping them to craft a good narrative. It's not just special effects, scintillating dialogue, violence. It has to have a good storyline as well. Well, filmmaking is related to writing. And of course, you may be a novelist, a short story writer, or it may be what you aspire to be, but journalists, copywriters need to be able to put the information that they are sharing in a way that makes sense, that tells a good story. Because, well, if we think about the way that perhaps some information is being told, what about government leaders and those that write their speeches? We know that government leaders at the moment are telling all sorts of stories to great effect, not necessarily good effect, but it shows the power of story. It shows the recognition of symbols and images in a community and making that into a story that has a compelling narrative. But not just in that area. Of course, copywriters are working in advertising as well and branding. And it's very similar in some ways, in that what they are doing is they are taking imagery, they're taking ideas, they are presenting it to connect with the hopes and the dreams of customers in the way of showing that they might be able to change their life with the product or service. And of course, a lot of people that are thinking along this way would be entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs, of course, generally are running small businesses, having to think about a lot of areas, but their story, their heroism, if you like, if they can communicate that, then perhaps they make a connection with their potential clients. But also it's the story of their product. And if we're looking at entrepreneurs, we need to look at technopreneurs. Technopreneurs perhaps struggle even more in this area because they're great with technology, but not necessarily good with people. And telling stories is some way that we can use to engage with people. It's the same with engineers, perhaps, and researchers. You know, they may be in their academic institution, making all sorts of research, finding all sorts of things. But if they can't communicate it, then they're going to struggle in trying to commercialize those ideas and bring it to the market. So as I said, I mentioned about academia, I mentioned about lecturers. And, you know, it could be that they are well versed in all of the data and the latest research, but actually what they need to be doing is making connection with the story, finding the story, and be able to give examples and humanize it. Because that's what storytelling is about in the end. And the human resources departments in many businesses will understand how stories are really important in being able for people to make a connection where they're working, to understand their place there. And in doing that, in human resources using stories, well, a lot of the time we find that there are trainers and facilitators who are there also using stories, utilizing them, and being able to perhaps to help people find a new narrative so they can operate more effectively with greater passion, take initiative, and be really inventive now in their role within that community. So there we go. That's all 20 done. And all by the techniques of storytelling. Basically what I was doing was finding a link from one to the other. I had an idea what was coming next, but that idea of what was coming next came about because I had already made the links in my mind simply just by writing each of these down on a piece of paper. It took me as long to think of those ideas as it took me to write them down. That's how quick it was. In fact, telling you the story took longer. So if you want to be able to do that as well, I can help you. And it can apply to any of those areas that we were talking about. So just so that you know how to get in contact with me, and if you want to come onto the micro modules, it's johnny@story-practice.com, or you can message me on my business Facebook page, The Journeyman. 3 words. So come along, join us step by step as we take the journey into storytelling and story practice. See you there.